This is episode 7 of Standing Out. Standing Out is a remarkable interview-style podcast with the intention to highlight women and men making outstanding contributions in their field. I'd like to welcome Mandy Godown as our guest today. Mandy will first tell you that her career path has been anything but predictable, from nonprofits to startups and branding to programming. She's founded a few companies, given a speech at the White House, and conducts life experiments on herself, like choosing to be homeless for 2 months or singing in a rock band. If pressed, she'd say that her real skills are the art of story and community building. She currently runs Be Bold Studio, her boutique branding biz, and organizes 2 great event series in Colorado, She Says Boulder and the Veneta Project. She also co-founded Control Console, a tech startup. These days, she's taking all the insight she's gathered to power the next evolution of her work, one that focuses on shifting startup and business culture for the better. Mandy is working with startups, investors, businesses, and visionaries to help build inclusive, diverse cultures that thrive. Her goal is simple: get more women leading. Why? Not because it's the right thing to do, even though it is, but because it's also incredibly good for business. So welcome, Mandy. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks. So I can't start this interview with asking about the homeless experiment without doing that.
Yeah.
It's
not like I was living on the street, but
okay.
I think it's a good life lesson about the fact we often feel confined, like whether it's because you're not doing what you want to do at work or whatever. And I was feeling really tied down. And the irony of that was I was my own boss. I was living month to month on my rent, so I could move out if I wanted to. I could travel the world if I wanted to, but I didn't feel like I could. And so one of the things I realized was if I just kind of stepped away from all my stuff and experienced different ways of living, I wanted to see what that felt like. And so basically I couch surfed. And traveled for 2 months. And some of that time I spent living on a remote ice cream and plantation in Hawaii for a couple weeks, which was amazing.
Well, that doesn't sound bad at all. I think we all could do this.
No, it was rough, let me tell you. The meditation and the healthy food and the beach, so hard. But the rest of the time was really me staying with different people in different lifestyles. So I stayed in a high rise in the city. I stayed in a little tiny farm. I lived with, individuals. I got to spend a couple of days by myself for the first time in a month. And it just was this experience of there's so many different ways to live your life. And ultimately I have a VW Beetle, the hatchback.
Yeah.
And I packed it with stuff, not full. I mean, it's not like I had an SUV.
Right.
And I have to tell you, I didn't touch over half of that stuff. It was unnecessary for 2 months. And then when I got home back to my place after 2 months, and my first thought was yay, I'm home. And then also, oh God, there's so much crap I have to deal with. I don't need any of this. So it was very liberating to realize what you actually need. But do it in a way that I had a lot of control and I still had the amenities of life and experience, and do it as a journey.
Mm-hmm. I can totally relate to that. I had a friend who went to India for a yoga teacher certification, and she came back and she describes it as culture shock, getting back to all the stuff she had. And the first thing she did was clean her place and gave away a ton of it because it just felt so unnecessary. When you chose those places to stay, the high rise, Hawaii, how did you decide where that next piece of the experiment was going to take you?
I was pretty open to it. I had originally reached out to some friends, and the funny thing was my 2 things I knew for sure I was going to do completely fell apart. And a part of the beauty of that is life is like a journey, and this was totally very freeform. And what I learned is even when things got crazy, something always fit. And if I just didn't panic, if I rolled with it, if I reached out to my network, something always came up to fill that spot and give me a place to stay and people to connect with. And sometimes I barely knew them. Sometimes I knew them really well. But it was also this beautiful discovery of we don't really do the stay over, right? As adults, And there's something very different between going to coffee with someone and making that little bit of time with them.
Yeah.
It's really concentrated and dense, and you're like, okay, let's get through everything. But when you stay at someone's home and you have breakfast with them, you'll probably see them for dinner. There's a different kind of pace, and things unfold in this much more organic and deep way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up learning things about some of my friends I never knew, really good things. Like I found out one was an author I had no idea, and we had amazing connection points. It was his wife who I thought, she was the one I really connected with. And she ended up having gone on a big trip for most of the time I was staying there. So he and I got to really connect. I did have one rule. I couldn't stay anywhere longer than a week.
That's a good rule for this experiment. Don't get too comfortable.
And that only happened, I think, once. I only stayed in one place for a week, and they were like, you can stay as long as you want. I was like, I can't do that. No. But I will.
I think that's such good advice in life and in entrepreneurship is that things don't always go as planned, but even in spite of that, something is going to come out of that, and you're going to be okay.
Absolutely.
And how has that kind of, thinking of your experience in doing this experiment, how has that message served you in entrepreneurship with all these things that you're doing and leading?
It's funny you ask that because it's a lesson I have to keep reminding myself of. Mm-hmm. I'm really also a huge enthusiast when it comes to travel. And I spent a couple months in Asia seeing if I could work and live and make that a part of my life.
Oh, okay.
And that was another experiment.
Yeah.
And what I found was that one of the things that we do as individuals when we're home, when we're in a place that we know, is we tend to think that the world works from A to B. Like, oh, this is where I'm going, and I go to the store, and this is my store, and this is my restaurant. And we think about often entrepreneurship, like I'm going to go from A to B.
Right.
The reality is life is not like that. No matter where you are, whether you're traveling, which you tend to expect not to understand how the systems work.
Right.
But when you're at home, when you're in your community, it's still, you never know what life is going to throw you. Mm-hmm. And you never know what your day is going to be like. We can map it out a little better, but it's so much healthier to understand that you're in a lot of unknown and to embrace it so that you can thrive instead of, what's the word I want to use? Turtle. And get frustrated. It's really, it does increase your quality of life when you start to think of the fact that you're going to be on a squiggly line, and that's just a part of the process. Map where you want to go, but realize you're probably going to get there in a different way, or halfway there you may realize, oh hell, I don't want to go there. This is way better.
I'm going a different direction.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And I love that graph. Just what you're saying, what people think entrepreneurship is, and it has the starting point and then this beautiful line of lots of increases, and then side by side it has, so that's perception, and then it has reality where it's just like loop-de-loop roller coaster. Yeah. Sometimes you go back and then sometimes up and down. Yeah. So true.
And there's a great story. So there's this misconception, and it does occasionally happen, that a company goes from 0 to 1,000, and they are going to be the, I don't want to use the term unicorn, but going to be a super company. Yeah. And it happens within a year or 2 years max. Like that does happen. But the reality is behind the scenes, you don't realize that the people on that team have probably been thinking about this idea for a year. And they're bringing on people who have all this experience that makes them perfect or better placed to take this company forward. But there's a ton of work behind the scenes that you don't see even in the moment, let alone all the background and all the time they've spent just learning and acquiring skills and connections in the network. So a big misconception is that 0 to 1,000 and that's the path. It's not usually like that.
Right. It's not. And one of my first bosses in the marketing world, she said, Katrina, everything is a resume building experience. And you don't realize it in that moment. But when you look at those companies and who they used to work for, or what their background was, or why they are now the perfect person to do that 0 to 1,000. It's like, well, that was a decade in the making. That wasn't just they showed up and could do this, Yeah. So that's interesting. How did you get started in entrepreneurship?
completely by accident.
Isn't that funny?
So my story is that I started in environmental studies. I'm very passionate about, creating a better world and communities and just being smart in general about how we use our resources. And then I ended up going into some nonprofit work. And ultimately, what I realized while I was working in this nonprofit, great organization, they do great stuff. It's called E-Town. If you haven't heard them, they're a wonderful radio and media program. Great stuff. But I found that I was spending all my time going to tech events and to community gatherings in the entrepreneurial community in Boulder. And I just loved the energy. I loved how innovative they are and the agile kind of methodology and thought process of let's test a lot of things, not all at the same time, but let's test and keep iterating. So after a while, I just realized, why am I not actually in this when I spend my free time going to these things?
Right.
And my community is mostly these people. And I applied for a scholarship for a coding program, and I was one of 2 women selected. And so that's when I really transitioned, and I started coding and learning about that side of tech, and started my own company then, right at the same time, Be Bold Studio, where I was just like, I'm just going to do my own thing. And that's where the branding and storytelling, and then also some coding, I do web design and things like that, came together.
That's really interesting. So there's this quote, and I have 2 young children, and one already reads, but the other's just learning to read. And the quote is, learn to read and you will be set free. And when I hear entrepreneurs talk about their story, especially the accidental ones, so many of them are talking about how they learned to code and something happened. And I'm wondering, do you feel like gaining that skill is in the entrepreneurship world is a set you free sort of moment?
Actually, I should back up, because though I think that that's really important, I think coding is so important just because you realize it's kind of cool. You can create a whole world. It's a language that it builds worlds and experiences. And what I loved about it, and what drives me crazy about it, is when you're coding, especially when you're learning, and actually the whole time, your whole career, you're hitting your head against the wall repeatedly, trying to figure out how to do something. But the second you figure it out, it works. You have instant gratification of, I figured out a problem. So you have that like, but what's really the aha or the transition eye-opening moment for me was more gradual. And it actually started with She Says. So the organization I now co-organize in Colorado, I started out just going because a girlfriend said, Mandy, you should come to this. Yeah. And my response was, it's really for marketing and digital women. I'm not really that at that time. And her feedback was, these are really smart, capable, awesome women, and I know you're looking for that. And that hooked me, because I also was aware of the fact that so much of what you think is possible is based on the women and people around you. And I didn't have great role models. I had distant role models who are like, they're in the news, or, Mother Teresa, or,
Right.
But I really was struggling at that point. And that community was so huge in me seeing greater possibility, taking the leap, and having cheerleaders to kind of just not like rah, 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 but just like, you got this, go for it. And that's one of the reasons why I run the organization now with Keisha Benvenuto, because I know it can help, and it's sometimes subtle, and sometimes it's very obvious. It's like, it gets you that amazing job, or, you build a team for a startup from that community. Like, there's a lot of ways it can impact your life, but the big part is your community is so important to how you perceive the world.
That is so interesting. And surrounding yourself with other smart, capable women and getting to see they're doing it, and then they're also encouraging you, and they see that those same elements in you. It's just a full circle sort of thing. So I want to go back to your bio for a moment and reread one of your last sentences, because I think this is really powerful, and this is what Standing Out this interview series is all about. Is we're talking about men and women making outstanding contributions in their fields, and I love this. So what you say, your goal is simple: to get more women leading. Why? Not because it's the right thing to do, which it is, but because it's also incredibly good for business. So tell us about that. How did this mission start?
Kind of in the way of a snowball downhill.
Okay.
So between doing She Says and doing a tech startup and helping entrepreneurs and their companies grow, Boulder's an amazing community, and I think we're also, on the whole, we're very open and supportive, and we want diversity, but it is not a very diverse community. Just learning so much about, like, I haven't lived in Silicon Valley, but I get to I read up on all the it doesn't have a great reputation when it comes to women. And for me, that has become such a focal point for me in realizing that it isn't just that, yes, it's the right thing to do to have women in leadership and helping to run companies and creating that kind of environment. It's actually so incredibly valuable to businesses as a real world profit margin builder. And I'd say that a couple of things brought me more into this. One was raising money myself. I got really lucky, but I've been through a couple rounds with other companies where I know how challenging it is. And I know women who are entrepreneurs, and I know how challenging it has been for them. I also know that the market, when you're looking for funding, it's so heavily guy. And I've had amazing conversations with women who are angel investors. They actually started Mergelane, which is an accelerator specifically for women, Sue Hallbronner and Elizabeth Krause. And just their feedback of, by stepping up and getting out there and getting on panels and talking about angel investment, they're seeing change in our community because more women are jumping on board because they see it as a possibility. So it's like all these little pieces coming together. And then Vanetta. So the Vanetta project is run by Vanessa Dawson. And she is, I'd say, one of those visionaries, creating a space where women are the focus as far as women co-founded and founded companies come together, pitch in a room that is supportive. We bring in lots of investors and angels and give them the opportunity to get that platform going.
Right.
So that was a really long answer and it didn't quite hit the nut, did it?
Well, no, it totally does. And I think it goes back to your point of being surrounded by other smart, capable women doing these things. Yeah. I want to share with you, the Kauffman Foundation was quoted to say women-led private technology companies are more capital efficient, achieving 35% higher return on investment, and when venture-backed, bringing in 12% higher revenue than male-owned tech companies. What is the deal? Like, because we see that, and then other studies indicate, I want to say the number is 5% of all venture capital out there, women receive something like 5%?
5 to 7%.
5 to 7%. What the heck? Tell us about that.
Here's an even better stat. I mean, those are all really good stats. Yeah. One is a recent study done by First Round Capital.
Okay.
And they did a 10-year study of all their investments. And they have like Uber, Square. They have a huge portfolio. They are major.
Okay.
And they found in that review that female-founded or co-founded companies were 63% better on performance than the rest of their portfolio. Oh my gosh! When you average it out.
That's insane.
So it is insane, and
in a good way. But why are women so great at this? What is it?
My concern is I want to bring both parties together. It is men and women working together to change things. And the reality, I think, is not that women are just inherently better at running startups or businesses. It's not that. It's the power comes from both working together. So when you look at companies and you look at how they work, when you have a female founder, she's much more likely to have male mentors, male investors, and key hires early on that are male, just because of what's currently the majority in that community, especially in tech.
Okay.
So the benefit is that you have female perspective at the leadership level working with other like male perspective at the leadership level. And that translates across companies. If you, for example, boards, they're generally all male, all white.
Right.
When you bring on diversity, the companies start to outperform their competition. Like just adding, here's a fun number. They did a study of companies that are multinational. So we're talking about $10 billion a year companies. One female on the board would increase their profit margins, their revenue by 5%.
Wow.
Across the board. That's the average. That means one woman on their board is worth $500 million a year.
Wow.
So think about, you pay someone that much, and then that's the impact of having that different perspective and clarity, because we approach problems different. We're more systematic as far as the network of repercussions and opportunities go. And that creates this perspective that is really, really powerful. Better business decisions, better product iteration and design, better profits.
Interesting. Tell us about, for those people listening who don't know, tell us about your tech startup. And I'd like to really get into your funding adventures too.
Yeah, sure. So the tech startup is called Control Console, and it's co-founded with Jeff Chow. And what we do is we take the iPad and turn it into an intuitive way to control really dense creative programs. So instead of using a mouse or keyboard and like tons of keyboard shortcuts and things like that, it becomes specifically designed interface for each program, not a general interface. So it allows creatives like in video editing and photo editing to work faster. And if you're new to that software, it's really, really easy to learn up.
That's fascinating. So, and this is the company that you went out and got funding for, right? Yeah. Okay. Was it an adventure? Was it easy? Was it hard? What was it?
We lucked out. We actually, we had an amazing pool of advisors who also helped connect us to some people. And I'd say we don't have the standard story because it was basically a couple of conversations when we decided we were ready to raise. And and Foundry Group put us into their angel round, basically. So they create a whole pool of investors. They lead the round, and then others join in. And that's how we raised the vast majority of our funds.
That's really incredible. And I think that goes to your point about saying that women strategically connect. Like that sounds very systematic, to use some connections that you already have and to make those phone calls and have a couple conversations.
Well, and I think for most entrepreneurs, regardless of whether you're, what sex you are, it is really about network. And that's where some issues also come up, because on the whole, the network is, in general, male white dudes. It is, whether we want it or not a diverse community in Boulder, and certainly not in other communities. And I think that's starting to shift. But the more you reach out into those networks and become a part of them, the better your chances are of, one, raising funds, and two, finding the people you need to really build a killer company.
Right.
But for me, a passion point is like, ladies, if you're out there and you could be an investor, if you could be an angel, there are so many ways to learn up on how to do that. There's a great organization called Female Founders. It's femalefounders.com. And they're helping to train women up. And there's actually several more out there. I could probably list them off, but I'm not going to. The more women we have out there, the more opportunity amazing companies have to get funded and get their products out there, especially, and I just say this in general, women-founded companies, because we are drawn to what we are similar to. And because there is a vast dearth, or like there's a huge shortage of women who are investors, I think a lot of great companies aren't getting seen. Because if only 5 to 6% of investors, like VCs, are women, and only about 5 to 7% are getting investment, there's a really strong correlation there.
Right.
VPs and angels, if we can start increasing those numbers with greater diversity, both racial and gender, I think we're going to see a lot better companies as a result of that.
What sort of tips or advice do you have for a startup who wants to be seen and they don't know where to network or what to do? Like, where do you think that community building starts?
Okay. Where does that start? The first thing is you probably don't realize who you know. So LinkedIn is a huge resource that I always use because it's usually 1 to 3 degrees of separation. Really think about, like, who do you want to know? Who is a major either connector or advocate for what you're doing? Find those people. And they don't even have to be right here or right near you.
Right.
But finding those people, they have a vast network. And then you can explore out from that. One bit of advice I would say is don't be afraid someone's going to steal your idea.
And you hear that a lot. I don't want to talk about it because someone might steal my idea. Why do you're
just getting started, I would say that if you're a really established founder and you have a major pull, you can probably go secret on things.
Yeah, sure.
And on the down low. But the reality is there are thousands and thousands of great ideas out there. Having the passion and the drive to build it and make it a reality, that is far, far more rare. And odds are most people aren't going to do it. Even companies that are, let's say, in your space, they're more likely to want to buy you.
By the hard work that was put in.
Yeah. That isn't always the case. And I will say, I know someone who did get screwed by a larger company that they thought was a friend. So there are risks, but I think in general, the greater risk is to hold it tight, because then you cannot find the people who will be excited about it, champion it, help you, connect you.
Right. That's really good advice. So as we get wrapping up here, I would love to know what you think the big trend or hot topic will be 1 year from now. What will we be talking about in a year? What will be on everyone's mind?
Damn. All right. So
a tricky one to wrap up, isn't it?
All right. I mean, I really hope that it's about how far we've come as a culture. But I think that the diversity trend in tech and in startups is going to be a longer path. But I'm seeing some really great steps, but it is a transition. If I were to say really big, I would say, let's drop the unicorn. I'm so tired of the term.
The unicorn made a big stride in the last year or so, but it may be overused.
I think that's gonna totally tank. Okay. I truly hope that it is that there is a rise in female VCs, because there's been so much press and talk and push for it. But to be honest, the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing is I'm going to use a F-bomb. I'm fucking tired of talk. And one of the things I'm most tired of is people saying, well, there aren't any women. And when they talk about hiring, the reality is the women are out there. There aren't as many, but they are definitely out there. It's just, are we creating environments where they will thrive and they will join?
Right.
A lot of women are opting out and going into consulting or going back to a different kind of job because they don't find an environment that supports them and gives them the same opportunities. And I think that is possible to change.
Hey, I know I said last question, but I want to stay on that for a minute. What do you think these companies can do to help women opt in? Is it cultural things? What is it?
Yeah, I could talk about that for a while. But what I would say is that there are several factors. I would say the longer you wait to think about diversity, the more you are hurting your company. Because diverse cultures thrive. And that's gender diversity, that's ethnic diversity. I push the gender diversity more because it is less likely in most tech and startup cultures.
Right.
It's more likely for a guy to continue hiring guys, especially when there are more of them in the field.
Right.
But diverse cultures, they do better. The earlier you start, like I would say, first off, if you're a new startup by your 4th or 5th hire, bring on something unlike you. If you're all guys, bring on a woman. If you're women, bring on a man. If you're men and women, but you're all Latino, bring on something else, white or African American, or just someone with a different background than you. And make culture, too, the really big one, actually, this is more important than anything else, is it has to come from the top. You can't hand this off to HR. You can't say, yeah, we're all about diversity and just talk.
Yeah.
Because people can sniff BS like nobody's business. And if it isn't really a priority in your organization to create a culture that is inclusive, it's not going to happen. You have to have your hand on the steering wheel. Just like anything with company culture, if you're not constantly touching back in and doing the work, you're going to go way off course, and it could get really, really rocky.
And really rocky. Well, that is a perfect note to end on. Thank you, Mandy. I appreciate you being here and taking some time to talk.
My pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much. Take care.